Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for today. This is a presentation of Clean Energy Group, and the topic for today's webinar is Resilient Power for North Carolina, Solar and Storage Efforts in the Wake of Hurricane Helene. And we have an excellent panel of guest speakers with us today, but before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few webinar logistics. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so your webcam and microphone are disabled, as is the chat function. If you have any questions or comments, you can submit them via the Q&A panel. We'll be saving 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the presentation to address audience questions. So if you think of a question, type it in when you think of it, and then we'll get to it at the end. Automated captions are available, and speaker bios will be made available in the chat. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will email you a webinar recording within 48 hours, and it will also be posted on CEG's website at cleanegroup.org/webinars. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today, my colleague Olivia Tim.
Thanks, Zareen. And hi, everyone, and welcome again to this webinar. This is a presentation, like Zareen mentioned, of the nonprofit group's Clean Energy Group. We're a national nonprofit advocacy organization working to advance a transition to affordable, reliable, and clean energy for all. A few of our project areas include climate resilience and community health, distributed energy access and equity, energy storage and flexible demand, and the replacement of fossil fuels with renewables. And I'd encourage everyone to go to our website to learn more about this work. That website is listed at the bottom of your screen. That's cleanegroup.org, and check out all of our other project tabs. One project we'd like to highlight is the Resilient Power Project. And Clean Energy Group established this work over a decade ago to support communities that are advancing solar and storage projects to build their local resilience. And through this work, Clean Energy Group provides technical support for local resilience. Next slide. Through our Technical Assistance Fund, and in the coming months, we'll be supporting community solar and community solar plus battery storage and additional community benefiting projects. So if you're interested in learning more, again, I'd encourage you to visit our website listed on this slide or to reach out to us directly. Next slide. I think we just have a few pictures of the technical assistance awardees over the years. On the next slide, you'll see some more statistics about this work. So over the last 10 years, Clean Energy Group has been able to award over $2 million in technical assistance grants, worked with over 200 community service partners, and within 360 community facilities. So pretty big impact over the last 10 years. And lastly, I just want to mention another project support grant program, which is the Resilient Power Leadership Initiative. This provides funds for folks to build capacity among community organizations. And for more information, again, check out our website, which is listed at the bottom of the slide. So for today's webinar, the main topic is resilient power in North Carolina, so solar and storage efforts in the wake of Hurricane Helene. And this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I'm a resident of Asheville, North Carolina, who experienced Hurricane Helene firsthand. The storm was on September 27th of 2024. And the storm caused unprecedented rainfall and strong winds throughout the southeast, but Western North Carolina in particular saw devastating flooding. Many homes and businesses were underwater, and over 396,000 people in the state lost power. Thousands still were without power for up to 2 weeks after the storm. So this webinar is going to focus on some of the ways in which organizations in this region responded to the storm and are continuing to build resilience moving forward. So we'll hear first from Jason Handley, who is the general manager of the Distributed Energy Group at Duke Energy, who will discuss Duke Energy's microgrid work, specifically a microgrid located in Hot Springs, North Carolina, which was able to restore power to a rural area very quickly after the storm. We'll also hear from Aubry, Larson, and Nate Heegaard of Footprint Project, which is a nonprofit organization working to deploy mobile solar and storage both in this region and outside of this region. And then lastly, we'll hear from Matt Abele, who is Executive Director of the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. After all these presentations, we'll take all of your questions that we have time for today. And like Zareen mentioned, please make sure you're putting those questions into the Q&A box as they come up, and we'll get to as many as we're able to at the end of our time today. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll hand things right over to Jason.
Thank you, Olivia. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. All right. Thanks again to Clean Energy Group for hosting this webinar. Definitely appreciate the time today to talk to everyone a little bit about the Hot Springs microgrid. So, as y'all know, Duke Energy is a pretty large company, one of the biggest electrical holding companies. We have about 8.6 million retail electric customers in 6 states and a little over 1.7 million natural gas customers. We also own and operate over 55 gigawatts of electrical generation. So today we're going to talk about Hot Springs and the microgrid at Hot Springs. And it's been a great project for us and for the community residents in Hot Springs, North Carolina. It's located on the side of a mountain next to the French Broad River, really just an ideal landscape here for a project. And so this is a community microgrid. We have remote microgrids, we have community microgrids, we have hurricane response microgrids in more hurricane prone areas like Florida. But this one is a 4.4 megawatt, 4.4 megawatt hour from a battery perspective. And it's got 2 megawatts of AC solar attached to it. The use cases were really around islanding reliability, so helping improve the reliability for the area, and energy arbitrage. We went live in 2022 with Grid Parallel, and we went live with islanding in January of 2023 with being able to pull off the full microgrid operation. The reason this was needed is because, Hot Springs sits at the end of a 10-mile long line. Our Marshall substation is kind of in the bottom right of this picture. And 10 miles from there is the town of Hot Springs, where our main load is, about 600 customers. It's a radial line, so we have no other source for the town. So if that line goes out, anything happens, tree falls, something happens, the town is out. The outages usually take an extended amount of time to locate, repair, and restore. Extremely limited access, as you can tell, hilly, very remote. So it just served as a great opportunity for us to test out the new technologies around microgrids. So inside the town itself, probably good to talk a little bit about some of the equipment that we have. We have what's called a point of common coupler of our PCC recloser. This is really what connects the DER resources, the solar and batteries, to the grid. And it really provides the downtown area of Hot Springs with service. It's really what we call our load segment 1. And then you may see there we have what's called an IID, or an intentional islanding device. This is what allows us to separate completely from the upstream grid, going back to the substation. So we use that device first whenever we have to island. We will open that device if it's not open already, and then we'll close the PCC recloser. And then, of course, we have 2 what we call switches or reclosers. Those are really helping us balance load between load segment 2 and load segment 3 with our microgrid. So obviously, entire Western North Carolina, South Carolina, and of course, a lot of our assets in Florida were significantly impacted by Hurricane Helene. As you saw in one of the first pictures, the French Broad River sits really close to the town. Well, actually, it has a Spring Creek that goes right through the middle of the town, and it's Spring Creek. If you can see my cursor, it is right here, and so it caused a tremendous amount of flooding between the 2, French Broad and Spring Creek, that really took out a lot of the downtown area, and it had a severe impact on our customers there. It also had a significant impact on our substation that feeds the town. Again, besides the French Broad River, the Marshall substation was basically flattened by Helene. The picture on the left shows some pieces of major equipment that are still there, but a lot of pieces were damaged or missing. The substation transformer was knocked off its pad a little bit askew, and our controls area, which where all of our relaying and protection and everything, really was completely washed away. There was nothing left inside except debris. So we knew we had a big job because this was the only power source for the town. And so we knew that we had to be able to feed it with the microgrid. Luckily, we had this Hot Springs microgrid that had been installed a couple of years earlier. We actually received notification from our distribution control center on Friday, September the 27th. And we, because of the flooding in the town, we manually initiated to open the breaker at the substation to keep residents safe, to make sure that there was no electricity that could be energized, sites that could be energized where there was potential flooding. What happened to our substation is subsequent after that. So again, we were able to work with the DOT a couple of days later after assessing to actually get across the bridge. They had shut down Hot Springs, shut down a lot of that area. We could not get there. And luckily we had a communication with the mayor of Hot Springs and then the DOT, and she was able to help us get access across the French Broad River Bridge to be able to access our site. We actually were able to get the microgrid back online by 7 p.m. The following day, which was October the 1st. We did not start picking up load at that time because we were still doing damage assessment inside the town. We had to ensure that everything was taken off, everything was going to be safe to be able to be re-energized. So that means a lot of the downtown areas that had flooding damage, we had to disconnect the services going in to ensure that there was no potential for electrification around these harder hit areas. So we actually picked up the town at 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday, October the 2nd of last year. But we didn't do that before we had a lot of communication with the town. Luckily, we were able to, we have a great partner in the town mayor as well as the city council. And we were in communication with them when we could get communication. But once we got on site, we had a much better ability to communicate because we knew where the mayor was. We could go down the hill and find her. But we wanted to make sure that we got notice out to our customers in the area. Because we had to ensure that people understood that this was not a normal outage. This was going to be a multi-day event. And generally, our microgrid was designed to only support the town for 4 to 6 hours using that solar and battery. And so we wanted to really make sure all the customers knew that if you could start to conserve power, it would really help us in being able to maximize the efficiency and the overall effectiveness of the microgrid for a much longer time. And we did go ahead and let folks know that, you know, during the overnight hours, we were going to be doing some load management in the town because we had to be able to make it through on the battery for the main part of the downtown area, which served a lot of the critical loads. So we would do some load management on the Section 1 and Section 2. It was a great relationship we had with the town as well as local law enforcement and emergency management personnel. We wanted to make sure that we had consistent power for the community, and we were able to do that with the town's help. I thought it was important to actually just show a little bit of a single line diagram about the microgrid itself. So if you look in the top corner where we have the green, that was our IID recloser, our intentional islanding device. That's what separated us from upstream back towards the substation. Of course, it was open. Our batteries are here. We have 2 different banks of batteries. You could see at the time, I believe this was the morning time when the sun was just coming up. So our batteries were starting to be a little bit lower in state of charge percentage. You can see it was 33% and 32%. But our solar here had not really, it was online, but it was not really generating a whole lot. Again, this was I think this was right in, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. But we still had 891 kilowatts of load at the time. So we were providing that with just our batteries. And you can see that our switches, the 2 switches were closed. One didn't have a whole lot of load on it, a lot of damage down River Road Drive, as you can imagine. And then we had a pretty good amount of load down Highway 25. And of course, the rest of the load would be through our downtown area here where a lot of our critical services for the town were being fed through. So just as a kind of an overview, the microgrid itself was utilized just using solar and battery. And again, this is an inverter only based microgrid. We do not have any spinning mass generation installed in it. from October the 2nd to October the 8th. And October the 8th, around 10 o'clock in the morning, we were able to get a mobile substation installed at the Marshall substation site, and we're able to go back to grid power. During this time, our average load was really moving around 600 kW to a megawatt. The interesting thing I wanted to make sure that we talked through was our PCC recloser, which served our downtown, from the time that the microgrid was able to accept customers, it was on 100% of the time. We had to do some load management between switch 1 and switch 2. So switch 1 was on 65% of the time and switch 2 was on 52% of the time. A lot of those times were at night, when customers were, generally sleeping anyway. But what we had to do was continuously look at the weather to ensure that we had good solar production that was expected, so we could charge the battery back up during the day so we'd have it for the nighttime. As you can see here on October 4th, we were not able to close back in at all on switch 1 or switch 2 because we had rain the whole day, heavy cloud cover and rain. So we had to start thinking about that back on the first day of operation, looking at the weather forecast, ensuring that we could have the correct state of charges in the battery, because we knew that when the sun went down on Thursday, October 3rd, we had to make it all the way through to the morning of October 5th with just the batteries. So we really had to do a lot of load planning there. Some key takeaways for the system. Switching plans are critical. I mean, automation and doing automatic switching is always ideal, but you need a backup when the automation fails or power safety shutoffs, similar to Helene response, are called into play. We couldn't actually have an automated control going from grid power to microgrid power. We had to do it through manual operations. We have a set of switching steps that we had to go through with our distribution control center. So make sure that you've planned these out extremely well. And we also are taking a different preparation approach for known storms versus unknown events. So unknown events, again, like a normal day, power goes out, it's going to operate automatically. In this case, we decided to self-island in preparation for this larger outage on the grid, which means we disconnected our microgrid from the grid early, because we didn't want any potential reclosing effects, any kind of anomalies to happen on the grid that may hurt our microgrid. So we went to what's called a self-island mode, which means we were basically taking care of our own power needs within the microgrid, not connected to the grid yet. And of course, as you go through these, you learn about design improvements, alternative communications, backhaul for critical systems. We have redundant communications, but both of those failed. We have fiber optic line that was down because we had poles down. We also had cellular that was down. So we were blind in a lot of cases until the cellular came back up, and then cellular was spotty. So we went ahead and put a Starlink system in here to ensure that we could have reliable communications for remote operations. Also, from a UPS system, that stands for uninterruptible power supply. Basically, when I talk about batteries, I always say my big batteries take small batteries to work. So when the power's out, small batteries are used to ensure that the communications and the automation and all the logic controls work. Well, after 3 days, all my small batteries were dead by the time we got to the site, so we had to charge those back up. We've now made an enhancement to the site that we've got an on-site smaller 50 kW generator to be able to take care of these backup power supplies, to be able to keep our bigger batteries online for a longer amount of time. So yeah, alternative means to charge the battery energy storage system. BESS, of course, stands for battery energy storage system. And if you do know, and one of the things that we continue to look at is Duke Energy had always been doing what we call inverter-only based microgrids, only microgrids with solars plus batteries. We're now starting to look hard at adding some sort of rotating mass generation to those for areas that maybe need a higher level of resiliency for multiple days instead of just hours. And then also, we want to look at overbuilding capacity on our microgrid. If you're familiar with battery storage, one of the things you can do is you can have an augmentation strategy or an overbuild strategy. Overbuild basically means that you're going to put more energy, more battery in than you need initially, because what you want to be is you want to be at a certain level at the end of its lifespan. And for us, it's 15 years lifespan for here. So even though on the first page I told you I have a 4.4 megawatt hour battery, I actually have a 7.2 megawatt hour battery, because what we're doing is the battery's going to degrade over these 15 years, And at the end of the 15-year life, it's going to end at 4.4 megawatts. So because we had an overbuild strategy, we actually had more energy in those batteries and were able to use them for longer periods of time. Other key takeaways are training and understanding of valuables available in our control system. So we learned a lot with this being our first big event utilizing a microgrid about some of our own terminology inside our control system. So we have allowable discharge DC energy was one number, and then DC watt hour capacity was a different number. So ensuring that our folks understood exactly what this means. And then improving controls on our PV and battery system. So some days it was great solar days, and because we have more solar than the town's load is, about double, we were able to use solar to charge the batteries up. But then what do you do with the excess solar at the time when the batteries are full and you don't need it for your load? Well, you got to start curtailing that solar. And so usually that needs to be an automated process. And ensure that you don't have to sit there manually trying to do it to keep a certain state of charge for your batteries. Just shared a couple of graphs here showing you 1 day's worth of the battery state of charge, how it goes down steadily during the day. We charge it back up and it starts degrading again overnight. And then the blue line here is the output of the battery. And then the gold is the solar output for 1 day. And as you can see, as solar comes back on, the battery starts coming back off, but basically starts charging. And it's an inverse operation with the solar. So if the solar is discharging at a higher level, the battery is able to charge at a higher level. When the solar stops, the battery stops charging as much. And I think I have one more slide here. Let's see. Yeah, and lastly, inverter only based resources are real, but they're extremely complex to build and operate. So really takes a lot to look at. We got to do the EMT studies, electromagnetic transient studies to begin with, which means that these are not static systems. These are dynamic systems. You have to understand what the fault current's going to be with an inverter only based system. Are you going to be able to take faults within the microgrid off the system? So they're complex to really understand how to engineer and build. But it's a great resource for us, and we've built around 8 of them right now. And microgrids are a great non-traditional solution option for socially vulnerable areas. Like hot springs, it's an environmentally sensitive area. That's the reason solar and batteries are such a good way to go. We didn't have to put a diesel genset or anything like that in. And then community microgrids can provide benefits for all customers. The solar generation provides added capacity back into the grid. And we're able to do this energy arbitrage. So I can use that battery to offset other thermal generation I may have to do somewhere else, using that solar to really take care of the hot springs, as well as charge up the batteries so I can discharge the batteries at night during non-storm times. And of course, the last 2 things, because I'm an operations and maintenance person, is we really have to look at the ongoing O&M costs to ensure that we truly have a good understanding of that. And lastly, to help really have microgrids become more and more prevalent in our industry, especially front of the meter microgrids, Duke Energy or utility owned microgrids, we need as an industry to have a hard dollar value for resiliency. Right now, resiliency is a soft cost, and it's hard to put a dollar value for that in a cost benefit analysis. We have to do what's best from an economic standpoint for our customers. And our Public Service Commission always wants us to make sure that we are using the least cost methods to serve our customers. So if we had a hard dollar value for resiliency that our public service commissions would accept, we could actually start using that as a benefit on our benefit side of our benefit cost ratio. So really do appreciate the time to talk today. I will be here after all the other presenters in case there are questions, but thank you very much for the time.
Hello, thank you for having us. My name is Aubry Larson. I am the development coordinator at Footprint Project. Our mission is to provide sustainable, cleaner energy infrastructure to communities in crisis. We are a nonprofit organization, and we develop and deploy sustainable infrastructure networks to empower community resilience. We work across the disaster management cycle to expand frontline access to climate technologies and reduce the fossil fuel use in the field. Since 2018, we've mobilized solar generators to over 25 disaster response and recovery missions. This means over 250 kilowatts of mobile solar energy and over 700 kilowatt hours of mobile battery storage, and over 50,000 people have been supported by providing sustainable energy access. These are a few photos of some of the various responses over the past 7 years, from Puerto Rico earthquakes to Hurricane Ida in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast to tornadoes in Tennessee and Kentucky and the recent California wildfires. And we've responded to many more. This slide here is a hand-drawn map by our friend and artist Jen Urso. It is a diagram of the Footprint Project life cycle from blue sky season, when we are focusing on preparation and community projects, to disaster event response and immediate to our long-term recovery. You can take a more detailed look at it later and learn more about us on our website, as a lot of it is very small details. Taking a closer look at our response timeline, we deploy as soon as possible after an event and rapidly deliver turnkey clean tech equipment to support local responders and resilience hubs, shifting to maintaining and upkeeping the sustainable tech in the field, and then funneling tech and opening what we call the free store, where we offer donated items for free rentals to those in need. My colleague Nate will talk about this further in detail and how we are continuing to do this in the Asheville area to this day, 9 months post Hurricane Helene. Our months to years post-event focuses on training and education to organize local groups to self-deploy the clean tech and be prepared for future events. I just wanted to give a brief background on our Hurricane Helene response, as this has been our largest and longest response in the Footprint Project history. We responded almost immediately as Hurricane Helene hit the Florida Gulf Coast, since one of our headquarters is located in New Orleans. And we were able to be in Florida within 24 hours, providing clean tech power as we heard news of the hurricane moving north inland and causing unprecedented destruction in its wake, specifically in Western North Carolina. With our assets staged nationwide, we had the ability to respond with a second team to North Carolina. It is the largest response and program we have had, and the first time that the funding has been available to open a second headquarters, hire 3 local employees, and continue the long-term resilience projects that are still ongoing today, and Nate will talk about further. On to you, Nate.
Nate, you're muted.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was trying to do the slideshow for Aubry, my colleague, and also figure out the mute and the video back on. My name is Nate Heegaard. I'm the Senior Technical Program Manager at Footprint Project. Let's do the slideshow here. So just to dive into the little nitty-gritty on our tech, we divided up into 4 different sections. Portable, which are smaller, all-in-one portable power stations. These can range from 1 to 2 kilowatt inverters, battery capacity 2 to 5 kilowatt hours, where you can pair up to 2 kilowatts of solar to that. Towable, our solar trailer fleet. These range with a power electronic system mounted inside in different configurations and ways, from 2 to 20 kilowatt hours of inverter capacity, and then battery storage of 10 all the way up to 100 kilowatt hours. And then this can be also paired with up to 2 to 10 kilowatts of solar through the solar mounted on the top, installed on wings, or slide out mechanisms, and then auxiliary arrays through a separate charge controller that so you can put out a larger array in the parking lot or the field where you're responding to with that trailer. And then we have palletized systems. This is where the power electronics and BOS components are mounted on the pallet itself. This ranges from 10 to 50 kilowatt of inverter capacity, 10 to 100 kilowatt hours of battery storage, and can take 10 plus kW of PV. And then we are slowly, or we are, should I say quickly, moving into containerized large systems. And these are going to be systems with 50 plus kW of inverter capacity, over 100 kWh of battery storage, and can take a lot of solar panels. This is just a slide from late fall last year when we were responding. We were on the ground within 24 hours. And by then we had assessed, I believe it was about a month later, we created this slide. I just wanted to share some of the data of our response during the rapid response stage, which is that first 24 to 48 hours, and then into the weeks, you could say midterm response, but that's where it's power's out, emergencies are happening. We're trying to get as much solar and battery microgrid systems into the field as possible. We at this time we support over 40 different sites, deploy over 100 kW of solar, and put out over 250 kWh kilowatt hours of battery-based storage systems. And those range from the small portable ones I just mentioned all the way up to the palletized, and we had a few containerized systems. So this is just an example of a site that we supported. It was with an organization called Po der Imma, and this was at a mobile home community park that they were supporting. And this microgrid, this mobile palletized microgrid you can see on the left there on the trailer, and the panels there in the field, was running a well pump. So fast forward a little bit. Earlier this spring, Footprint Project launched a free store, what we call the free store. And our response basically led to a large range, a lot of in-kind donations from the renewable tech industry. And this ranged from solar, pallets of solar panels to racking, wire, transfer switches, breakers, and it's some batteries. It's harder to get companies to donate batteries. But we had so many of these in-kind donations that we received in the months following our response that we decided to open what we called the free store. We basically have a warehouse in Mars Hill where this equipment is located, and we distribute this at no cost to empower the community to rebuild stronger and more sustainable. The requests come in online through an online form on our website, and our local team on the ground there assesses each request, and we do as much as we can to support that request. This oftentimes does include technical help with design and wire diagrams when we have the capacity. To date, we have worked on, or we have donated over 20 pallets of solar panels, inverters of all different sizes, a lot of wire and breakers and panels. We donate batteries when we can, when we have them in stock, and then we have worked to support 11 what we call free store projects that we have seen through the end, and the requests continue to come in daily. So as I mentioned today, we were able to open an office in Western North Carolina. This office is located in Mars Hill, where we have warehouse space. We hired 2 full-time program staff to manage the free store and the many different projects and programs we are engaged with and working in there with local partners and organizations. As I mentioned, we opened the free store, and we have over 40 plus community microgrid projects in the queue. And as I mentioned, they are coming in daily, and we are trying to respond to as many as we can. Just to name a few of the projects we are supporting, we worked with some partners to build out a brand new solar trailer where we mounted 1.5 kilowatts of solar panels on the top and 1 kilowatt a solar on a wing that folds up through gas springs. And this was for an organization called ROAR, which is the Rural Organizing and Resistance Group. We've supported a group called the United Ambassadors of Hope, where we helped design and then donated microgrid equipment to power their fridges and freezers for their teams out in the field working to rebuild. And then we are also supporting we have a number of projects in the works with fire stations, including the Broad River Shumont Fire Station, the Double Island Fire Station, and we are currently scoping the Marshall Fire Station. The Marshall Fire Station is an interesting case. They have the main station and then they have their substation. So what we're trying to do now is figure out how we can install a permanent rooftop solar array on the station's roof, and then install or build a mobile power system, so mobile battery-based generator to be able to charge off that solar array at the main station, power the station, and then if that station gets damaged or if something happens where they need to move it to their substation to power the substation, they can just move that battery-based generator on wheels, on a trailer, up to the substation, hook it into there, and get power. Oops. So as I mentioned, we have over 40 community microgrid projects in the queue. Requests are coming in by the day. We are trying our best with the capacity and resources we have to respond to them. Looking forward, we are working to add to our mobile fleet with portable power stations, and this is coming through donations from companies like EcoFlow and Bluetti. These are the all-in-ones, really user-friendly, easy to use, easy to move around, portable power banks. And hosting workshops and trainings where we solarize partner Orbis response trailers. We work with them to then install the power electronics if we can find the funding to do that, or have the donation equipment in our free store, and then train them on how to use it. We are also working hard to develop our relationships with local and regional partners to continue our fundraising efforts and support long-term recovery efforts. And that also includes building out our networks of industry partners for project engagement and to help get some help to support on all the installation requests that are coming in. Thank you very much.
All right, I believe that means that I am up next. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here today, and thanks for Clean Energy Group for organizing the webinar. My name is Matt Abele. I am the Executive Director at the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're based here in North Carolina and have more than 200 member organizations that consist of clean energy providers, local governments, nonprofits, universities, and corporations across the state. So energy consumers and producers, and we work to advocate on behalf of a clean, affordable, and reliable energy future here in the state. And most of that work is done at the North Carolina General Assembly and the Utilities Commission and with various state agencies in the governor's office. So the role that we played in this scenario is a little bit different than some of the work that we usually do. And so maybe just providing a little bit of background just in the scope of this specific instance that we're talking about here today of Hurricane Helene. For those that are outside of the state of North Carolina, Helene was, in fact, quite substantial in terms of its impact and damage, much of which I think is hard to grasp even just from all of the news stories that we saw last fall immediately preceding the storm. But since then, North Carolina's Office of State Budget and Management has done a broad analysis to better understand the total financial impacts, in which North Carolina experienced just over $59 billion in total storm damage. And of that 59 billion, nearly 7 estimated attributed to utilities and natural resource damages. So much of which we'll be talking about here today and have talked about related to energy infrastructure in that part of the state. More than 185,000 damaged homes, and unfortunately more than 100 lives lost in Western North Carolina. And we saw the impacts of this storm roll through around the end of September 27th. And fortunately saw a lot of response efforts, a lot of resources pour into the region. But unfortunately, in any sort of natural disaster, right, you see a lot of resources come in, and that attention and support wanes after a short period of time. And there's still a lot of work and recovery to do moving forward. And fortunately, we have amazing organizations like Footprint Project that are continuing to maintain a presence within the region to support the long-term recovery efforts that will take years, if not decades, for Western North Carolina to fully recover post Hurricane Helene. And just a little bit of additional backstory too. I think really the true stars of the show and some of the recovery efforts again are with the Footprint Project and another organization, Land of Sky Regional Council. But I also want to make sure to give a huge shout out to Duke Energy and their team. I mean, it was just an incredible feat of engineering and human resilience and deployment to be able to go out and to rebuild distribution infrastructure, miles and miles and miles of which in just a period of a couple of days, and having thousands of linemen deployed from states all across the country and even from Canada to bring back power as quickly as they did, given the widespread devastation throughout that part of the state. And here are some pictures that I think, again, don't do justice to just the level of destruction experienced in Western North Carolina. But I think given that level of destruction, it was imperative that we had groups like Footprint Project come into the region within 48 hours. I know we at NCSEA had been connected up via email with the Footprint Project team based on some of their connections and all of the great work that they had done in Maui, and elevating how impactful that was post the Maui wildfires and how we can really lean into that opportunity in Western North Carolina. And so we got connected with their team relatively quickly and wanted to make sure that we were offering up whatever resources that we could to continue to support their work in that part of the state and in helping to facilitate connections to organizations that had a lot of institutional knowledge about where the need was in Western North Carolina. And one of the organizations that has been just absolutely instrumental to this work has been Land of Sky Regional Council of Governments, who represent and work with a lot of local governments and emergency response organizations throughout Western North Carolina. And were so instrumental to elevating customer sites or elevating sites of local organizations that needed access to power, clean drinking water, and telecommunications. And that really truly helped to drive some of the efforts in terms of deciding where to deploy the assets as they were coming into the region, both via the equipment that Footprint had in inventory and the donated equipment that was coming in. So part of the role that NCSEA helped to play last fall was facilitating funds and equipment donations throughout our network and via some of our partners who have a more national network of manufacturers and installers. And so in a short amount of time, we were able to raise more than $850,000 in cash to directly support the work of Footprint Project and Land of Sky Regional Council. And collectively, between all of the organizations, raise more than $1.2 million of donated equipment. And I also want to make sure to give a huge shout out to an organization called Green Tech Renewables, who is a large distributor of residential and commercial solar components. They have offices, or otherwise known as profit centers, located in Raleigh and Columbia, South Carolina, and offered up transportation for a lot of that equipment directly into Western North Carolina as it was getting donated by a lot of different manufacturers and installers throughout the region. That was instrumental in being able to get equipment in relatively shortly there after the storm. And you can see some pictures of some of that equipment getting offloaded from some trucks at the Mars Hill location that Nate mentioned a little bit earlier. Additionally, as I mentioned at the beginning, NCSCA represents a whole host of organizations across the state, including a number of residential solar installers. And so key to the model for Footprint Project was leaning on local partners and installers to help deploy the equipment throughout the region. And so we were able to help get them connected to a couple of installers in Western North Carolina, like Sugar Hollow Solar and Sundance Power. And those installers were instrumental to helping to assemble some of the palletized solutions that had showed up and actually deploying and installing them out on site and making sure that they were getting paid for their work during that time when other projects in their project pipeline had dried up, because the more important issue at that point in time was making sure that we were saving lives and getting food and water out to communities who needed it most. So it was also imperative to help make sure that we were continuing to bring in resources for the solar installers that had been operating in that area so that they can continue to operate post Helene moving forward. Here's another example of some of the equipment that was deployed out on site. This was a little bit further up the road in Barnardsville, where there were some solar modules deployed connected to a mobile battery generator, in which it was being used to help power a Starlink and a couple of laptops out there for a community that was completely cut off from the rest of Western North Carolina, to be able to connect to the internet, let their loved ones know that they were okay, and to be able to fill out their applications, their FEMA applications, to get support as well. Here's another example of a trailer solution that was deployed out at the Big Ivy Community Center, which was a center that distributed a lot of the donated canned goods and other materials that were needed by the communities out in Western North Carolina. And I know that the day that I went out and visited with the team, this trailer was being used to power lights at that facility and also power the Starlink to enable folks that were out there to actually continue to work, especially remote workers, to continue to work, and also to fill out their FEMA applications to receive federal support. Here's just some more photos of some of the equipment that was available and deployed within the region, including sort of this mobile battery unit that you see here at the bottom that was manufactured by a really cool company that also was deploying a number of these systems out on the front lines in Ukraine. And these systems were incredibly useful out in Western North Carolina, as they were essentially put together and placed into like a Pelican case on wheels that you could then easily transport and pick up and move throughout the area whenever you needed it, or if you needed to pull it off site to recharge or to look at and determine if there are any troubleshooting or determining any issues that needed fixed with the system. You could easily transport that, which was great to have. And I love this map. I think it's probably difficult to see here on screen, but I'd encourage you to go check out Footprint Project's LinkedIn page, and I think this is probably also on their website too, which is a map that illustrates all of the projects that their team has helped to deploy out in Western North Carolina. And I think this image helps to illustrate the scale of destruction of this storm beyond, Asheville. And essentially you're looking at sort of a 5-hour swath, right, throughout Western North Carolina of areas that were just devastated by the storm. And so I think just the geographic scope and scale of Helene and the impacts are just unprecedented compared to any other storm that we've seen in North Carolina. And so I just huge kudos again to the Footprint Project team for having the assets and having the manpower to be able to deploy these all throughout that part of the state, and to the Duke Energy team to be able to restore power to such a huge geographic area in Western North Carolina that is very difficult to access in some places. So beyond just some of these mobile microgrids, the state of North Carolina has also been interested in how to continue to invest in resiliency through permanent microgrids and community resilience hubs. And actually, just about a month ago, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality announced energy efficiency and conservation block grants to the tune of $2.79 million. And of that $2.79 million, there were 4 or 5 projects that were specifically dedicated to installing community resilience hubs throughout North Carolina. One of those you can see, I know there's a lot of text on the screen, but is going to fund a community resilience hub out in Buncombe County, 180 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system. And then you'll see Davidson will receive a couple of projects as well as Orange County in North Carolina. I think this is just the beginning, and we've been working very closely with Footprint and Land of Sky to secure additional funding from state partners to further invest in community resilience hubs throughout Western North Carolina and also in Eastern North Carolina, recognizing that part of the state is still recovering from storms like Matthew and Florence from many years ago. And so we know, based on history, that Eastern North Carolina is incredibly vulnerable to storms like a Helene. And so we want to continue to invest in resilient infrastructure so that there are places for communities to go immediately after a storm that have access to power, clean drinking water, and telecommunications. So we're working very closely with state partners to secure additional funding to invest in that type of infrastructure. Beyond that, I wanted to just make sure to elevate that we, in just about a month, are hosting a Western North Carolina relief concert at Sierra Nevada Brewing Company in Western North Carolina, with all proceeds going directly to Footprint Project and Land of Sky Regional Council of Governments to continue supporting their work to deploy microgrids in Western North Carolina. I'll make sure that the link to this PowerPoint is sent out afterwards, and I'll include a link to purchase tickets to that concert coming up on July 31st. It'll be a good time, and you'll continue to hear more about some of the great work that Land of Sky and Footprint have been doing in that part of the state. For us at NCSEA, we're thinking about what comes next and how do I think we've seen, based on all of the stories that we've heard here today between Duke's Hot Springs project and a lot of these mobile microgrids in Western North Carolina, that this type of infrastructure is incredibly needed and proved to be incredibly successful after Hurricane Helene. So how do we continue to invest in this, and how do we continue to create the regulatory and policy environment that incentivize us to continue to invest in this moving forward? A couple of things that I just wanted to quickly elevate for folks, again, outside of the state of North Carolina. We recently saw an administration change here from Governor Cooper, who had termed out, now to Governor Josh Stein, who took office earlier this year. And between both Governor Cooper and Governor Stein, we have seen a focus on resilient infrastructure and solar and storage microgrids, and asks for additional funding to support these types of projects. Two things coming out of Governor Stein's office that I just wanted to draw attention to was a request for $1 billion in loan credits to the State Energy Office from DOE to establish a CEFI and fund microgrids for communications infrastructure. This is post Helene. And then additionally, a budget ask to the General Assembly for an additional $10 million directed to microgrid infrastructure in Western North Carolina. So great to see those asks. However, those asks have not yet come to fruition, although our team at NCSEA continues to meet with legislators at the General Assembly on both sides of the aisle to share the story about how this equipment has been incredibly successful and how we should continue to invest in that in the state, with hopes that we might see funding in the future dedicated to these types of projects. So more broadly speaking, some of the things that we're talking about quite a bit internally and with our partners are, what are the barriers that exist to deploying more resilient infrastructure like solar and storage microgrids in North Carolina? What types of opportunities exist for collaboration between the utility, community organizations, clean energy groups, and local governments to deploy more equipment like solar and battery storage? And how do we ensure that this equipment is being deployed to communities who need it most? So, that naturally sort of leads to some of the questions and policy solutions that we've been developing and will be looking to advocate for in the future. Things like expediting permitting of infrastructure. As probably a lot of folks are aware, when you start to look at residential and commercial solar, the rules for permitting vary greatly depending on the jurisdiction that you're operating in across the state. And so how do you streamline permitting to get more of that equipment on the ground quicker so that we can be better prepared for future storms? And how do we continue to blend public and private capital to continue to expand the amount of these projects that are on the ground? I think we have really, really great partners in North Carolina, again, like the State Energy Office and the North Carolina Clean Energy Fund, who have been thinking a lot about these topics and want to make sure that North Carolina will serve as an example for the rest of the country in how we respond to a storm like Hurricane Helene, and ensure that we are doubling down on our investments in this type of infrastructure so that the next time a storm like this comes, we have places for people to go that ensure that we're keeping medicines cold, that we have clean drinking water, and that we have an ability for residents to be able to communicate with their loved ones from outside of the region to let them know that we are okay. So these are all questions that, if folks here on the line that are listening in have been thinking about and have answers to and have examples of projects or case studies that have worked well in other parts of the country or in other states, I would love to have a conversation with you as we continue to develop out strategies for policy advocacy at the commission and at the General Assembly, that we can work very closely with our utility partners and work closely with other partners that you've heard from here today to continue to ensure that North Carolina leads by example in how we respond to disasters like Helene. So with that, I thank you for the time this afternoon, and I will yield the floor back to Olivia, which I think will lead us into our Q&A. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I'd like to invite everyone to come back on camera. We have a lot of great questions in the chat, and I'm glad that we have a full half hour to get to all of them. So yeah, we'll just dive right in. So I'll start first with some questions for Jason, kind of going in order of presenters here. But we had some questions coming up about the community engagement process when installing the microgrid in Hot Springs. Folks were curious if there was any kind of pushback or community enthusiasm, what that kind of looked like, specifically for any safety concerns that were experienced when in the planning process. If not for this Hot Springs microgrid, then for any other ones that Duke has engaged with.
Sure, thanks, Olivia. That's a really good question. So I think Hot Springs microgrid was our first foray into a community microgrid, front of the meter community microgrid. So I think we learned a lot about how to interact with the community better. We had multiple meetings with the town. We'd have town hall meetings and just try to explain exactly what this is, but also what it's not. And that's the key point for us is a microgrid's not perfect power. You should not expect to never go out of power again. It's just another resource. And so we really wanted to make sure that we reach as many people as we could during the initial stages, the planning stages. We were lucky enough to find a great partner that we were able to lease the land from, which happened to be the only industrial complex in Hot Springs, North Carolina. But we were able to get a nice coordination and collaboration there with them. And the partnership's been great with the town. The mayor and I are on first name basis. We talk a lot. And we also go back through our community relations managers and ensure that, if there is feedback, and there has been, there's been multiple feedback loops throughout. Anytime the customers have a question. And one of the things that's come up recently is, well, we don't know when we're on the microgrid and when we're on grid power. How can we know better about that? So it's really interesting. Some customers, especially now that the microgrid is out, doesn't seem to have a problem with any safety aspects. They're not talking about, because I mean, we've been pretty upfront about what we have there, with it being solar panels and lithium-ion batteries. But it's more along the lines of, how does it actually operate? What can we expect out of it? And so those are some good conversations. And we took this and all the lessons learned from Hot Springs, and we've put it to our other locations. We are in the middle of 11 microgrids right now. 8 of those are constructed, and 3 of them are under construction right now in North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, and Indiana. So we are really trying to use those lessons learned and really make sure that we have that good collaboration, coordination with the town, even as far as sound dampening, as far as fence shielding. Do we need barriers around it for vegetation, or it's not an eyesore to some people. So it's really been a great collaborative process, and we've learned a lot, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback from our customers.
Thanks. I think that kind of brought me into my next question that I had for Jason about any of Duke's kind of future microgrid deployment plans for the region. Anything, I know you kind of touched on that there's 8 in construction and 11 total being developed. Is there any kind of more information that you can give about those and how maybe Duke decided where those would be located?
Yeah, so another really good question. We are continually evaluating our system in North Carolina and our other areas where solutions like microgrids might make sense. Because microgrids can be extremely valuable under the right circumstances, but they're not a one-size-fits-all solution. They don't work everywhere. They're not a silver bullet, is I guess the easiest way to say it. In places like Madison County and potentially coastal areas, they make a lot more sense because we had really hard to reach places that are radially fed, so no other alternate source, edge of our service territory. Other places that may be a little bit more urban, there may be better solutions. Second transmission line, upgrading distribution poles, hardening distribution poles and lines. So what we do is we take a really hard look at working with our capacity planners and our reliability planners to find areas that may have reliability needs or either some type of capacity need. And then we make the decision. We have a very, very rigid qualification process for non-traditional solutions, non-wires alternatives. And we go through that and work with our local distribution planners, our reliability engineers that are local to really say, is this going to be the right fit? And number one, it has to be economic also. Because if it's not, if there's a traditional solution that makes more financial sense, well, we're bound by the Public Service Commission to go with that type of solution. But we're always comparing and looking for these non-traditional solutions or non-wires alternatives where they can actually fit into our grid.
Great. And that kind of also leads me into the next question that I have specifically for Jason, and then we'll kind of pass things around. But we had a lot of questions about the value of resiliency. You had touched on how, there isn't really a good way to value resiliency when you're kind of fixing out the economic model for these type of projects. How did Duke financially justify the Hot Springs microgrid? Was resiliency taken into account? Some folks have cited work being done by national labs on valuing resilience. Wondering if there is a metric that Duke was using.
No, not at this time. So this was actually, project was started back in 2017. There was a CPCN, which stands for Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. Sorry, it always takes me a minute to remember what that stands for. And that's where we have to go before the commission and say why we want this. Well, this one was approved in a pilot project. So it was not necessarily financially, it wasn't a terrible financial decision, but it was not necessarily probably, we didn't do a complete benefit cost analysis on hot springs. Let me put it that way. The commission approved it as a pilot project for us. So we did not have to actually have a positive benefit cost for this. Since then, though, we have used the learnings from hot springs to really hone our CBAs, because we do have to put a cost benefit analysis for all of our other microgrids that we're doing. We need them to be positive. We need them to be the best solution versus a traditional solution. And you're absolutely right. There are now other national labs, and even the IEEE, EPRI, the Electrical Power Research Institute, all are working on trying to get their handle around what could be of value for resiliency. Duke Energy, myself, I've even commissioned studies from consultants to say, what could we include? Social vulnerability indexes, social justice 40 indicators, things that we have not done in the past, but will help us, that may really get us to where we need to go to show it's more than a hard dollar value, because the only thing I put it against that is it going to impact the customer's bill from the standpoint of, will this be a generation resource for it? Will it be able to offset other costs somewhere else? So we're really trying to work with our national labs and other places. We use the ICE calculator, the interruption cost estimator tool that Lawrence Berkeley National, I always get Lawrence Livermore and Lawrence Berkeley mixed up, but Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, they're just coming out with an ICE 2.0 calculator. Duke was a big part of that. So what I would say is, yes, there is still no industry accepted value for resiliency, but the industry is aware and we are working on it. And we hope for between the DOE or our national labs, we're going to be getting something that our commissions will be able to say, yes, we agree with this. I'm not even looking for one number. If I even had a range that I could take to my commission and say it's going to be in between X and Y, I think we would be able to have a lot more discussion with our commissions about why these types of solutions make a lot more financial sense also.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so some questions for Footprint Project. We had some questions about the donations that Footprint Project receives, or do they receive donations of used solar panels, batteries, and other equipment? And do you consider these types of deployments to be a good opportunity to give used solar technology a second life? I know some folks had brought up that companies routinely are disposing of batteries and solar panels in landfills once their effectiveness is reduced. And kind of would love to hear about any opportunities, if there are any, that Footprint is using these kind of less effective or donated or used technologies for their work.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've changed our in-kind donation processes over the years. We used to be a lot smaller, a lot more scrappy, and we would basically take anything when it comes to solar panels and batteries and BOS components, charge controllers, wires, breakers, etc., that people would want to give us, and then we would try to figure out how to pass it along or build our own systems out of it. Now we're finding ourselves in a stage where we're actually getting we have a lot of outreach regarding donation, basically people saying, I have this, I have a pallet of these used panels, I have a pallet of batteries that have been that we haven't used. But the issue over the years, what we've run into is the challenge with accepting older solar panels and older batteries, especially that haven't been tested or have been sitting on a shelf. The battery shelf life of lithium batteries, LFP, lithium ferrous phosphate, is the battery technology we normally use right now. as the advancements in that technology have increased so rapidly, and they're just overall safer when it compared to other lithium battery technologies. Is they can each manufacturer has its own shelf life. So if they're not being tested or charged regularly, then we receive a pallet of batteries that half of them don't work or half of them have a capacity that is half of what it's rated for. When it comes to solar panels, the panels, if they're not tested, if they're taken down after a storm, there's a lot of upcycling that goes on after that, and talk about that. How do we uh, reuse all these panels that only a couple of them were damaged on a rooftop, but you have to take down the whole array? Well, if they're not tested and they send it to us, we end up spending more time trying to test them and go through the ones that we could maybe use, then it ends up being worth it. So when it comes to solar panels, we actually no longer have, we no longer accept used second life panels at this time. We just don't. We've had too many situations where we have, and it's resulted in, we then bring them out in the field, we try to set them up, and half of them don't work. So yeah, through the generous, through just the amount, I guess the awareness in the industry that our organization has right now, we actually have more solar panel companies reaching out to us with brand new solar panels, pallets of panels that are maybe last year's model that they have in a warehouse, and they need to move or get rid of because the technology is changing so much, so they write it off. Then we know what to do with right now, or at least know how to coordinate the movement on it. Because a lot of times these companies will be like, and they're great companies. They've donated a lot to us, and it's amazing. But they'll say, we have 40 pallets of panels in this warehouse. Would you guys like them? But we are not able to coordinate the logistics and operations to get those out. So we'll kind of, basically assess if the panels are worth taking and they can be used, and then take them. But it's only new panels right now.
Awesome, thanks. Another question about the footprint trailers specifically, and what kind of support they provide during regular grid operations. So times when there aren't big emergencies happening anywhere, what is the kind of regular operations? Folks have been curious if there's a bi-directional component to the trailers, either vehicle to grid or vehicle to building, or if that's something that Footprint has been exploring.
Yeah, we have been exploring the bi-directional. That is a very complicated engineering. There's been advancement of it, especially when it comes to, more permanent systems, larger containerized systems. But a lot of times when it comes to a trailer, they're just not big enough to do the whole design, engineering, and configuration between the panel and the building, the charging of the EVs, that like to make it worth it for the trailers. But we are continuing to explore that, and again, the technology is advancing by the day. In regards to the question of what do we use the trailers for when we're in blue skies, or not when and not in gray skies, when we're actively responding to a disaster, it's a little all over the place. A lot of people, we have probably upwards of 50 solar trailers right now across the country and in Puerto Rico. And we do our best to work with the orgs and the groups and the partners that are holding on to them, where they're being staged, basically on standby to respond when a climate disaster hits. And yeah, they'll use them for events. We've had some groups use them for to power their nonprofit booth sections at festivals and stuff like that. So we try to get them out in the field and use them as much as possible in blue skies. Actually, right in front of me, I'm at our office in New Orleans here, and we have a trailer that we've daisy chained to 2 palletized systems, and then we have an essential loads panel that we have put up a back panel that is connected to our building. So that's powering the lights our kitchen, the internet, and some outlets. So we put that to use here.
Great. And I did just also want to remind folks that all of the links, both to the free store for Footprint Project and as well as the Community Resilience Hub intake form, those will all be available as links in the slides that are shared out with folks. I know we had some questions about wanting to access some of those forms, so everyone will have access to those when the slides are sent out. We kind of have a broad question about, kind of coordinating disaster response. So someone was wondering how are projects scoped to maintain a balance of being expedient and impactful, which stakeholders are generally involved for the buy-in process to get the actual boots on the ground. So are we working with utilities, town leadership, federal leadership, just kind of whoever would like to take this one. Just curious a little bit more about the coordination to build out either microgrids or emergency response.
Well, from the utility perspective, we work really closely with our towns and our first responders to ensure that we understand where there may be needs. As Matt said in his presentation, it's not just Western North Carolina. In fact, Western North Carolina was kind of I wouldn't say a surprise, but it doesn't usually get hit with hurricanes. Eastern North Carolina has been the ones that we have typically worked with more closely. So now creating the same types of relationships, having those storm calls, things like that, Duke is trying to do a lot more with throughout our service territories in all of our counties. We have an emergency response plan for everything that we do. We follow the incident command structure system that's from FEMA. And so we have the incident management teams, we have the site commanders, all this stuff, really trying to make sure that we have a nice flow and that we can, when major events happen, we can enter into working with our local communities, our local towns very seamlessly.
Thanks. And kind of a follow-up to that, I'm wondering specifically about Footprint Project's engagement with community organizations on the ground. Someone mentioned, was wondering if you were working with churches and faith organizations and how that kind of collaboration happens during blue sky times, so that when there are disasters, you're kind of connected and plugged in quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It changes depending on the nature of whether, again, yeah, in blue skies or gray skies. In blue skies, if we come into an area, respond to an area with our equipment, and we have the capacity and resources and the funding to then be able to stay for the longer term recovery and rebuilding stage, which can be years and years, maybe even decades, we do everything we can to stay. Our Helene response was our largest, or is our largest to date. It was the first time in the 7 years that we've been around that we were able to raise enough money through cash for operating, and then through the donations of equipment, and hire long-term recovery program staff, local, that live in the area to operate and manage it. We had never been able to do that before. We were always kind of just especially in disaster season, and you could argue disaster season is basically the entire year now. It used to be from the spring, to the fall, at least in the disasters that we responded to. And we would just go from disaster with a few trailers and some portable, all-in-ones, and to the next disaster. And we weren't able to stay for that longer term rebuilding stage. And but yes, in terms of the groups that we work with, our group, you could say we are group or organization or partner agnostic. We've worked with a lot of different church and faith-based organizations. A lot of times the churches are the ones that have their doors open the first, that are set up as aid distribution sites and shelters. So we have sent power to a lot of churches on the front lines after disaster because they're providing the services, those critical and essential services to their communities that are needed the most. So yeah, we don't, and depending on like we're group uh, organization agnostic when it comes to our response. We want to help the people that are helping people, and that could be any group or organization. They don't have to be a 501c3 registered. They could just be a grassroots mutual aid group of some people that have come together to offer services to support their community.
A question for Matt from the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. Some wondering about how North Carolina residents who might be interested in either getting involved or keeping informed about the state's clean energy policies or resilience plans. Just thinking about what opportunities exist for either fundraising or information sharing or advocacy. Are there any opportunities for folks to get involved through NCSEI's work or other work?
Yeah, there's lots of opportunities to get involved, and there is just a lot going on more broadly in the clean energy ecosystem throughout North Carolina. And part of that too being that North Carolina has long been a national leader in clean energy. I think probably most folks know that North Carolina at one point was #2 in solar in the country, and we now are home to 109,000 clean energy jobs and have seen $59 billion in total investment and economic impact since 2007. So there's a lot going on in this space all across the state. And I will also say too, North Carolina has seen some of the most investments for clean energy manufacturing of any state in the country since the passage of the IRA. So we've seen about $21.5 billion in projects announced here in the state. So there's a lot going on. And NCSEA, outside of sort of the conversation that we're having here, has been very closely tracking and advocating for the extension of the clean energy tax credits, right, which are under attack right now in the reconciliation bill on Capitol Hill. So we're engaging our network here in North Carolina to continue fighting for those tax credits. And there's a lot going on, of course, in our General Assembly as well. So I'd encourage you to check out our website, which is energync.org. We've got a newsletter where people can sign up. And we also have a great blog series as well, where we cover all that's going on at the General Assembly and Utilities Commission and at the federal level related to clean energy in North Carolina. And we are still running a fundraiser to continue to support the folks at Footprint Project and Land of Sky Regional Council, and information about that is on our website as well. And then again, I think I would encourage folks, if you're able to, and in North Carolina, joining us at the end of July for our Western North Carolina Relief Concert. It's a great way to stay tuned to what's been going on and continue to support the great work of Aubry and Nate and their team.
Fantastic. Love a fundraising plug. That's what I was hoping to hear. Thank you. Kind of a question for Footprint about kind of building out permanent microgrid infrastructure. I'm just wondering what your process is for that, and does Footprint Project do all of the installation work themselves, or do you all hire contractors to work with? Just kind of curious about that process.
Yeah, so we actually don't have any licensed electricians on our staff. So the answer is yes. We work with contractors, and if there are licensed electricians that want to donate their time, we've worked with those people before. But when it comes to permanent microgrid installs, you're dealing with different coding restrictions depending on a range of factors, location, and so our specialty where we got is the mobile and portable systems meant to move around, where we don't have to operate under the NEC standard electrical codes for permanent installation. So as we're getting more and more into the involvement of permanent installations, especially for long-term recovery and rebuilding efforts, we are working with local industry partners on the ground who are the experts in that, and that's what they do. So Matt mentioned, or companies around the Asheville area, like Sugar Hollow, Sundance, Pisgah Energy. Pisgah is one of the experts in like large um, microgrids, and so yeah, developing those relationships, especially when it comes to our long-term program efforts, if we have the funding to do it, is essential to be able to make those installations work.
All right, and in our last
And
couple of
safe,
minutes,
I should say.
I wanted to just kind of ask a broad question to all of you. Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to tackle this one, but just kind of curious to see what y'all see as the biggest challenges for microgrid deployment and resilience planning in North Carolina, and some of the kind of unique moments of opportunity that you're seeing for our state moving forward in this realm.
Yeah, I think we're each going to have a little bit different answer, depending on our perspective. From my perspective at Duke, I would actually love to see more interaction between our regulatory bodies and ourselves. If you look at some other states, California, Massachusetts, others, they've got microgrid incentive programs to help offset some of the costs. And I think those have been really well received. So I think those are things that we can, from our regulatory side at Duke, we can continue to work with our state regulators to see, and our policy folks, to see if there's a pathway forward there. But I also think that there is, a great need in the industry, and we're getting there around standardization from inverters to battery storage systems themselves, because I've got 52-foot containers. I've got 4-foot cubes that have battery storage in them. And, spare parts and operations and maintenance is one of the things I'm responsible for too. And so I've got to be aware of not just my capital upfront costs, but my long-term ongoing O&M costs here. So I think from an industry-wide, I think we're getting to a sustainable point where batteries, solar is definitely there, but batteries are one of the things that we're going to be able to start, having more scalability and repeatability. Those are the kind of things that I need at the scale that I'm at. And just because we have to be bigger to make it worthwhile from a cost perspective, but that scalability and repeatability is going to be key.
So I 100% agree with everything Jason said. And I want to kind of dig in on the regulatory side for just a second. I think we have a really great example in North Carolina of, the utility, working with the commission to advance a program that I would consider sort of like a VPP type light program called Power Pair, in which there is an upfront incentive for new solar and battery storage residential customers, where you're eligible for up to a $9,000 rebate. And that program has had tremendous uptake since it took effect last year, I believe last May. And so the way the program was set up, it was set up as a pilot program where there was 30 megawatts of capacity in Duke Carolinas and 30 megawatts in Duke Progress. And so the pilot was set up to basically run until that capacity was met, or at the end of a 3-year project, or end of 3 years. And based on the trajectory right now, I think we're set to hit the capacity in probably about half the amount of time that was originally set out of that 3-year window. So what that has demonstrated is there is significant customer demand for these types of solutions in North Carolina. And so what that looks like moving forward is, as Duke comes back to the commission, is how do we make the case for a program like that in perpetuity beyond just this pilot? And then I know, coming up to, as part of the carbon plan last year, the Utilities Commission authorized Duke to start working on a non-residential version of that Power Pair program available to commercial customers in North Carolina. So I'm excited about that as that program starts to come together and gets filed in front of the commission. And then, on the larger projects as well, outside of Duke territory in North Carolina, we've seen some of the co-ops also deploy their own microgrids. one that sort of stands out to me is Ocracoke. I think it's Tideland EMC that's out there where they have a microgrid project. And a few years ago, there was a contractor that was doing work on, I think, the bridge going out there and ended up severing the transmission line, cutting off power to the island, in which that microgrid came online and was operational and helped to supply power to some of the businesses there during peak tourist season. So we've got some good examples of other microgrids that have performed well in North Carolina. So of course, we would love to see more projects like we had seen in Hot Springs and over in Ocracoke. And then just to circle back around on the tail end of that, on the challenges side, I saw somebody had asked a question about expedited permitting and whether Solar App is a good answer for that here in North Carolina. And unfortunately, the answer is no. And part of the reason is based on our understanding of engaging with the NREL team on this. The requirement is that a jurisdiction must, or a state, for example, like North Carolina, must be at least at the 2018 IECC Energy Conservation Codes or newer. And unfortunately, in North Carolina, our General Assembly has delayed the implementation of new energy conservation codes or building codes until at least, I believe until at least 2031. And we're still in North Carolina operating off of 2013 building codes that are amended essentially to look like 2009 building codes. So we're going to be about 20 years behind by the time we actually implement new building codes in the state, therefore making us ineligible to be able to use Solar App for jurisdictions across the state, which is a big challenge in terms of local permitting and something that we definitely want to stay attuned to at the General Assembly moving forward.
I can speak really quickly on behalf of Footprint Project. A lot of our challenges have been our capacity and funding. So we have, as Nate said, we have 40 projects in the queue and more coming in every day. And we're growing quickly. We were able to hire local employees and more, but it's still just the capacity to be able to complete these projects and manage the projects. So just still need that. The long-term funding, what we see often after disasters is the surge of funds come in right post-disaster, and then it kind of peters out. And so it's figuring out that long-term resilience funding and continuing to be able to continue all the projects because the demand is there, like Matt said, and it's just keeping it going with the people power and funding.
All right, well, we are just about out of our time here today, and I want to thank all of our speakers again for both all of your work done in North Carolina, surrounding Hurricane Helene and into the future. So thank you all so much for sharing your stories and your information today. For webinar attendees, the slides will be sent out within the next day or so, so you will have access to all of the links and resources and information posted in them. So again, thank you so much for attending today, and I'll pass it back to Zareen.
Thanks again, everyone, for attending. These are just a few of the upcoming webinars we have. There's part 2 of our solar and battery storage fire safety webinar focusing on utility scale projects and EVs on July 8th, which will also be hosted by Olivia. There is a community storage webinar on July 17th, and if you would like to sign up for either of those, you can do so at cleanegroup.org/webinars, and that link will also be sent to you with the webinar recording and slides. So thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.